Welcome everyone to the September 14th, 2023 meeting of the Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation Transportation Committee. We have four great topics tonight: an update on Vision Zero Action Plan for Denver. They've recently released version 2.0. We have Rolf Eisinger here, who's the manager of Vision Zero in Denver, and we'll hear from him on the updated plan. We'll get an update on the East Colfax BRT, which has reached some very important milestones, including funding availability. Denver's new Curbside Action Plan will talk about what used to be parking management plans and now is being looked at in what I think is a much more holistic way, and hopefully have some templates citywide for all the different competing uses of our limited curb space. And we'll end the night, I'll be able to introduce you to Natriece Bryant. Natriece Bryant with the state of Colorado, someone I've gotten to know over the past year as we worked on Burnham Yard, and we'll hear all about that. But I'm excited to bring this topic while it's still quite early to the INC Transportation Committee. Before we start, a couple announcements. We are forming an update committee for our INC transportation platform. In 2015, this committee completed and transmitted to the INC delegates a proposed platform that was, a platform is really a compiled list of positions. Here's the change we'd like to see in the city and for transportation. And then there's another one for zoning and planning, and there's another one for parks. Since 2015, I was reviewing all these platforms over the past few months, especially the transportation one. Since 2015, we've achieved so much. And by we've achieved, I mean we collectively. The residents, the advocacy groups, the dedicated employees of the city departments and agencies and other agencies like RTD and CDOT, and then of course the elected officials, all kind of moving in the directions we're calling for. So we've got a lot to identify as successes and celebrate, a lot that will be continuing into the next version of the platform, and of course adding new ideas, all with an eye towards getting a package to the INC delegates that will be broadly supported by all neighborhoods, because it will take a vote of INC to adopt that. So please drop a note to transportation@denverinc.org if you'd like to participate in that. And let me just find Rolf to give him screen sharing permission. So I'd like to introduce Rolf Eisinger with our first topic, and that is Vision Zero Action Plan 2.0. I will stop sharing my screen, and Rolf, you can share yours.
Let me see where I am.
If you wiggle the cursor so it comes up with the mute and whatever is a big green button.
Okay, let's see if we get the right screen too. Okay.
May I? I'm sorry. Before I interrupt you, I had promised Jill right before this meeting, and I was a little flustered. Jill Locatori from Denver Streets Partnership, you had an announcement as well.
Thanks, Joel. I was just about to text you to be like, do you want me to say this at the end?
I'm sorry.
But that's okay. The announcement is the National Week Without Driving is coming up October 2 through 8. As the name implies, this is a national event organized by America Walks and others. And the intention is to raise awareness of what it's like for people who don't have the option to drive, and the barriers that they encounter trying to get around their cities, and the solutions that could make our cities more accessible for everybody. So here in Denver, we are teaming up with Pedestrian Dignity and the National Organization for Youth Safety to host National Week Without Driving for the first time. We are inviting just regular residents of Denver, as well as our city leaders, to pledge to do their best to go the whole week without driving and share what they learned during that week. So I will pop into the chat the link to our website where you can learn more and pledge to participate if you want. And there's a bunch of events that we are organizing leading up and during that week. The Thursday before, we have a webinar where you can get tips and tricks about how to survive Denver without driving. And then during the week, we're hosting a youth mobility justice gathering to focus on youth as one of the categories of people who often can't drive. And then we're ending off the week with a film screening and a panel discussion about efforts to fight for safer streets across the country and how we're doing on Vision Zero here in Denver. So please visit the website and reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you. And for those watching the recording later, I'm sure they can get info at denverstreetspartnership.org, right?
Correct. And I put the link in the chat so people can go there directly.
Thanks. All right, Rolf, I'm sorry we've lost a little bit of time here, but this is a very important update. Over to you.
All right, can you all hear me?
We can hear you. You can see your screen. It's all perfect.
All right, here we go. All right. Well, by way of introduction, good evening. My name is Rolf Eisinger. I manage Denver's Vision Zero program within the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure and within the Division of Transportation Planning. Just want to say thanks for the opportunity to come to your group and present about the updated Vision Zero action plan. This is a 6-year action plan to align with other 6-year plans. And it's a plan where the city recommits that a single life lost on our streets is unacceptable and preventable, regardless of the way people want to get around our city and also social economic status. Wanted to mention that we crunched a lot of data for this new plan so we can make data-driven decisions, and the next few slides will review some of the data that in fact we did look at. All right. I would say that today there's a greater need than ever for Vision Zero. Yes, we can say that more people are moving into Denver and the traffic fatalities per population is almost static, but zero is zero, and our goal is 0 traffic fatalities and or serious injuries. This slide shows how we compare with the national average and other peer cities. Even though we are better than the national average, we still have a lot of work to do. When looking at the type of streets that have the majority of serious crashes, you can see that arterial streets represent 83% of streets that result in traffic deaths or serious injuries, whereas local streets are at 7%. And with that, we'll talk a little bit about our high injury network, but this does speak to our high injury network, talking about that 5% of our roadways are on our high injury network that make up 50% of our traffic deaths. When you look at contributing factors, we see that driving under the influence, speed, occupant protection such as seatbelts, or children being properly restrained in their seats are all top contributing factors for traffic fatalities. And when you look at mode, we see that vulnerable roadway users overrepresent traffic fatalities. But on the flip side, we see that riding transit is the safest mode. Once somebody's on a bus, we have not seen a single traffic fatality in the last 5 or more years. So that is definitely something that the new action plan identified and created as a new key theme in our next action plan. We'll see a little bit more of that later on in this presentation. A couple other things that we are tracking. Tracking the next wave of motorized vehicles, EVs, and their impact on safety. I include a chart on the left that many of us use to justify slower speeds on our streets, showing that vehicles, when they travel 25 miles an hour or less, people outside of vehicles have a significantly higher chance of survival if they are being struck, as opposed to if that vehicle is going faster, even 35, 45 miles an hour. But those stats are really based on a vehicle 3,000 to 5,000 pounds. And with the amount of weight the batteries weigh in some of these new EV vehicles, they can weigh 5, 6, 7, even upwards of 9,000 pounds. So some things to think about in terms of, well, that kind of weight, and what does that mean in terms of speed and being on the other end of that as a vulnerable roadway user. Other things to think about, more and more of these vehicles have so much more torque and can accelerate so quickly. For example, there are vehicles out there now that can reach 60 miles an hour in less than 2 seconds. You know, thinking about Denver's roadways, including the interstates, I don't think there's a speed limit over 55. And many of our arterials and collectors are 35, but just thinking about the quickness of these vehicles is something to think about in terms of traffic fatalities, serious injuries. But despite an increase in deaths on our roadways, we have seen safety improvements where we are implementing safety-focused projects. And here are some examples. So the Lincoln Safety and Transit Project, there hadn't been a single fatality or serious injury in over a year from when we pulled these stats. And also the West Colfax signal timing project, where we improved safety and fatalities decreased from where there were 9 lives lost down to 1. Yes, we still have work to do, but this is definitely a safety improvement from what it was before, and just with retiming of signals. In addition, we started a rapid response program. I believe I presented on this before, but just reiterating the effectiveness of it. Where there is a traffic fatality, and for those who didn't attend my previous presentation to the group, when there is traffic fatality, we work very closely with the traffic investigating officers to better understand the root causes that led to that crash. And we work with our engineers and a cross-functional team to determine what could be done, either be from an education standpoint, encouragement, or engineering compliance. And this is an example of an engineering countermeasure and working with CDOT on improving pedestrian visibility, warning signs. They had done some DUI enforcement, especially during the holiday season. But this is just one example of many where after a fatal crash, we look at crash trends of the location. We determine if we need to go out on site to see what kinds of quick or mid or possibly long-term improvements could be done at these locations to prevent future fatalities. In addition to that, our photo enforcement program led by DVD currently has had a significant increase in safety. And the new bill that is out, or law, could provide even more opportunity to focus on some of those higher speed roadways that we haven't had the opportunity to deploy this effective countermeasure. Street lighting makes a difference. You can see on the left what it would look like before, and on the right with the new LED conversion. So if you have all traveled from one jurisdiction into Denver, you can often see a difference in the streetlights in the evenings, and how much more bright and concentrated the light is pointed downwards towards the street. Reflective backplates. This is a low cost, I'd say, safety improvement, but nonetheless helps increase visibility for traffic lights, especially at night, and especially if the traffic light is no longer working. Motorists can still see it, and pedestrians and people riding bicycles. And it is a FHWA proven safety countermeasure. Okay, jumping into the action plan here, wanted to touch on, with Denver Moves Everyone and all of the public involvement and the planning that went into creating that document, we used it as an opportunity to align planning efforts to update our Vision Zero action plan. And Denver Moves Everyone helped us seek quite a bit of public input, which led to the recommitment of Vision Zero, and zero is the right number. By reaffirming Vision Zero, Denver rejects the status quo that traffic crashes are unfortunate accidents. We accept that traffic crashes can be prevented by systematically addressing their causes. And below are the set of principles that we are now using with our new Vision Zero action plan. I'm not going to read all of them, but just a couple of them that I wanted to highlight, including human life is our highest priority. Motorized traffic speeds are incompatible with Vision Zero progress. Yes, safe human behaviors, education, traffic safety enforcement are essential contributing factors in transportation system. But this one, we're all human, we make mistakes, but hopefully we are designing our transportation system in a way that when people make mistakes, it does not cost them their life or a debilitating injury. We updated our high injury network, and when we updated it, we included not one, but 2 tiers. Tier 1, you can see, has a much higher serious bodily injury and fatality rate of 21. And tier 2 is much lower, but still higher than other roads of almost 3.5. Why did we do this? A couple of reasons. One is for those roads that are starting to creep up with crashes, and particularly the fatal and serious bodily injury crashes, we start to see them pop up earlier on before they get to a tier 1. And the inverse, our tier 1s, hopefully as we make improvements, they will go down to a tier 2, if not fall off altogether. So it's kind of an early warning system, the canary in the coal mine, if you will. And it allows us to see how we are improving on those segments. In addition to that, we looked at developing another layer that we didn't have in the first action plan, but looking at something called a safety focused area. So in addition to the corridors, we discovered that there are areas that we should prioritize our resources that could really make a difference for particularly vulnerable roadway users. So it's not just a linear corridor, but a few streets or even an area like downtown where one safety improvement could have meaningful impacts, not just at one location, but in the whole area. Either it be the implementation of pedestrian lead intervals, or possibly no right on reds, or something like that. Same with reflect back plates, adding more time to cross, a whole host of possible safety improvements, and many of these are outlined in our action plan. Looking at pre-crash maneuvers that lead to serious bodily injuries or fatal crashes, we see that left turn crashes are significantly a very dangerous movement, and therefore wanting to focus on where those crashes are happening and how we can mitigate those with protected left turns. And it's not just for the motorist, but oftentimes we'll see that a motorist may only be looking at the oncoming traffic when trying to make that left turn, but they may fail to see the pedestrian or somebody on their bicycle trying to cross as well. So definitely this is a multimodal safety improvement. And that gets us, we used a lot of data, looked at how to make the biggest difference here in Denver, and it came up with these 6 themes. There are 3 on this slide, 3 on the other. But number 1 is to protect vulnerable roadway users, focus on pedestrians, people biking, micromobility, even motorcyclists. Also, we talked about those arterials, but yes, targeting the arterials, crash cluster intersections and those focus areas, improve street design and use of technology to ensure that there are safe speeds being behaved on our streets. Continue to engage with local communities in terms of culture of safety. Collaborate across agencies on policies and with our fleet and data progress and dashboards, and key is evaluating. So once we do a project, going on, make sure that we hit the mark. And if we didn't, keep layering on through that safe system approach, other safety improvements to ensure that we do get that desired outcome. And number 6 here, focus on shifting modes away from driving by building out our transit network. Again, that was the safest mode that we saw. So it is critically important to support the build out of transit. And also, many of their corridors that they have identified are along our high entry network. So it makes even more sense to align our efforts so that we can reach zero more quickly. In terms of the action plan and the action items, we have 3 sets of action items. The Vision Zero actions, these have a direct link to reducing serious and fatal crashes. We have internal actions that speak to how we manage the Vision Zero action plan, and we have supportive actions that the Vision Zero team would rely and need help and partnerships from other agencies and other partners in order to move forward. Here's our quick list of high-level action items, and underneath these, there are several other sub-actions, but just to give you all a flavor of the priority here in the Vision Zero action plan. So one was to develop and implement a DOTI safety policies, a safety working group there around what policies do we currently have, what are best practices, how best to move the most meaningful policies forward. Another one is, again, to not only create, but then implement the recommendations from the safety focus area plans, develop a citywide speed reduction team, also create and develop a crash management team that can act as a resource for all of our programs within DOTI in terms of better understanding the crashes that are happening within their project locations, developing, which we have already started to do, a safety evaluation program. More to come on this, but we are starting to do an even better job of evaluating our projects and not just waiting for crashes, 2 years, 3, 4 years down the road, but tracking the behaviors that we're seeing with the projects, either be yielding behaviors or turning speeds, ridership, and those metrics can be captured, 6 months, 8 months after a project has been implemented. And then continue to work with DOTI's transit program, and I'd say RTD, to ensure that we're partnering with them with the safe improvements in order to transform our high entry network. We have a couple more slides here. Other ones include increased use of traffic safety cameras, either it be speed or in red light cameras. Number 8 here, create car-free zones or slow zones, and an implementation guide to help us know when and how to do this. Next is capitalize on quick build opportunities. If it shouldn't take 3 years to design and implement paint and post kind of treatment. How can we implement these treatments in 6 to 8 months after we identify an opportunity? Continue to support our pedestrian, bicycle, micromobility, and again, transit network. Create a multimodal safety curriculum for our next generation of multimodal users. Provide information education about how to ride transit, how to bike, how to fix your bike. Being safe while walking around and being safe when you're in a vehicle. Once they get to the point, if that is an option or if they'd like to do that, and what to look out for in terms of more vulnerable roadway users. So setting our next generation up for safe and successful mobility. And continue to target community engagement and dialogue and support community through placemaking and traffic calming initiatives. And finally, one of the last ones is to continue to make City, County, and Denver government agency a model Vision Zero adopter. And this, we can see an example over the last couple of years. We implemented our telematics technology in the vehicles to ensure that vehicles are doing the speed limit, stopping at stop signs, wearing seatbelts, and if they're not, having coaching events with staff about behaviors. We've seen an improvement in safety and safety behaviors in our vehicles because of this technology. There are a number of supportive actions. I'm not going to read all of these because I know we're short on time, but they are in our action plan and our internal actions, which speak to how we operate and manage the program, delivering the annual report, continuing our advisory meetings, and continuing to advocate for funding and staffing to meet the commitments in the Vision Zero Action Plan. And I'd say woven throughout the whole Vision Zero Action Plan is the ability and the need to use the racial equity toolkit to ensure that the recommendations and the projects, policies that are coming out of the plan and our work do not have any unintended consequences. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
We do have the link to the full plan in the chat, and you can find it on Denver Gov if you're watching the recording later. We have some questions in the chat. We started a bit late due to technical issues, so we'll take 5 minutes. And if we could do kind of rapid fire questions, I'll call out some that have been proposed in the chat. And if you would ask your question, and Rolf, if you could give a brief answer. Wendy was starting with leading pedestrian intervals. Wendy, do you want to unmute?
Sorry, I stepped aside for a second. Yeah, I was saying that having lead pedestrian intervals on parts of Broadway, I'm in the Baker neighborhood, so Baker and Spear area has those. And also I've noticed that at Alameda, like at Cherokee. And I feel like it's made it super safe to cross, or way safer, I should say, to cross while walking and rolling. And so is there a plan to implement this more widely across the city, ideally at every signal citywide?
That's a really good point. I'm glad it's made it safer in those locations, and we are looking into that. That's kind of like that DOTI policy idea that, you know, that should probably be our baseline for when we do signal operations, is that every signal gets that. And our consultants, when they start to design and work on our signals, that is the standard. And we go from there. So that is something that we are very much tracking and following and working on. So thank you.
Great. James had a couple questions about downtown, which is highlighted in the new plan as a particular area of concern. James?
Yeah, sure. So just in my experience, I live downtown. The places I see the most close calls are definitely 15th and 19th. With kind of, it seems like one of the biggest upgrades we could get for safety on those roads is left turn signals for cars. Is there any priority for where kind of those protections would be going in downtown?
That's a good question. I think it depends on our crash picture and also the ability for the signals to have that kind of accommodation. Either is the technology available, or is the infrastructure available to do it? Great. Let's, you know, in the crash picture, you know, in order to prioritize where makes a lot of sense. But where we may need a new mast arm or minor rebuild of a signal, you know, those are things we all consider when we're looking at implementing protected lefts. I'm assuming on 15th, I'm gonna guess, are you referring to with the bike lane and making less?
Yeah, exactly. Bike lane for bikes and scooters. I've seen a lot of close calls, especially on 15th.
Yeah, and I know the idea behind those wedges were to slow vehicle turning movements down, but again, that's something with our evaluation program. Evaluate it. Are we hitting the mark? Is it working? So thank you.
And the last question in the chat, David Mincer has a question about what neighborhoods can request and why sometimes it's turned down.
Hi, thanks. I think a lot of us feel that the plastic flex posts we see everywhere really aren't up to the task of saving lives, and we want some more kind of urgency met to solve this. And a lot of neighbors have been asking for speed bumps and even removing a lane of traffic on streets like 13th and 14th. And when Amanda Sawyer did her traffic study and asked DOTI about that, they said that's not even an option. So I guess my question is, are some of these more drastic solutions on the table, and why are we so reluctant to do things like speed bumps and removing lanes?
Good question. So, speaking at least to some of the speed bumps, I know they're starting to implement some of the speed humps on the neighborhood bikeways. So before it had been that we weren't doing those types of safety improvements, but it sounds like now that over the last year or so. It's been a kind of a change.
There's like five of them, I think.
Right. I understand. Yeah. Moving in that direction, I'd say, whereas before they weren't entertaining them at all. And also looking at those roadway reconfigurations, we will need a bit of a revolution on our roadway network in order to reach zero traffic fatalities, in order to get those speeds down. And that is something that with the Vision Zero Action Plan, we acknowledge, and we need to make some of those harder decisions. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. We've gone over just slightly, but please do look at the plan. It's full of a lot of action. There's a lot of principles that were discussed here on the PowerPoint, but there's a lot of action recommended in there. I'll end with kind of the question of the day, Rolf. Today was Budget Revelation Day. We saw the mayor give his press release and a press conference with the budget. What does the funding look like for Vision Zero efforts in this proposal versus the current year?
That's a great question. I've been in meetings pretty much all day, and I have not had a chance to look at it. So I'm looking forward to jumping into it and seeing, for my first time, to see what the funding is. So sorry I can't answer that question. I wish I could, but I'm going there next.
Okay, we'll have a limited time to give input to our council members for any changes that we'd like to see in the budget. So let's all take a note to review that. Rolf, you're welcome to stay for other items or to answer more questions in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to our presenters on the East Colfax BRT update. And I've made Emma the presenter, so you can bring up the slides. We've got John Stewart and Charles Alexander presenting. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks, Joel. And before I hand it over to John and Charlie, I just want to give a quick introduction and set the scene for the team. My name's Emma Harrison. I'm on the community engagement side of things for the East Colfax BRT project, and are super excited to be with you guys tonight. John Stewart is our project director. He'll give an update on where we're at in the project and where we're headed to secure some exciting and big numbers in federal funding. Then Charlie Alexander, who leads our traffic, parking, and safety analyses for the project, will share more about the effects on what the BRT will mean for movement, left turn access on the corridor, and parking. Before I hand it over to John, just first want to recognize our project partners beyond CCD that really make this project a regional collaboration. As John will kind of describe, East Colfax BRT builds on the region's transportation goals articulated by really many, if not all, of these entities. And so we are proud and excited for these partnerships, making this project stronger. So now, John, take it away, and I can run your slides for you.
All right, thank you, Emma. First of all, I want to say, Rolf, thank you for that presentation on Vision Zero. I think having us give an update on Colfax Bus Rapid Transit is a great follow-up to that, because this project is more or less Vision Zero in action, whereas Vision Zero is putting together the plans. This is implementing Vision Zero. And so we start off with what is the vision for this project? And it's to move people more efficiently, safely, and sustainably along East Colfax Avenue. We heard from Rolf earlier talk about transit having the least amount of deaths as far as transportation options getting through the city of Denver. I think he said something like there hasn't been a single death in 5 years. And so having a bus rapid transit line along Colfax Avenue is a great way to advance a lot of plans that a lot of different regions in the area have been working on. And Emma, why don't you go to the next slide? As Rolf said earlier, Denver Moves Everyone was the planning process for the city of Denver for the transportation network. And some of the key key factors that went into prioritizing different projects and different ways of moving about the city are listed below that plan on the slide before you. And those are mobility, safety, sustainability, community, quality, and equity. And those are in alignment with the Denver Regional Council of Governments Regional Transportation Plan, excuse me. And also in alignment with the city of Aurora. And the main thing that we've been hearing over and over when these plans were being put together, and what we continue to hear, is people want more options besides a single occupancy car for moving about the city. They want something that is more safe, and they want something that's more sustainable and that helps build community within the city. And so I think that East Colfax BRT really hits all of those priorities that are in these plans. And let's go to the next slide, Emma. Yeah, so what are some of those priorities? There's different social, there's different economic, and there's different environmental benefits for having a bus rapid transit line along Colfax. It provides more reliable and sustainable travel options, and it does it safer, and it does it more economically. So it also supports vibrant and walkable and connected neighborhoods. One of the things about the Colfax bus rapid transit line is that we're removing 2 general purpose lanes of traffic along Colfax and making those bus only lanes. And so, yeah, that's going to help connect the community. Colfax Avenue traditionally, well, maybe not traditionally, but in the last 50 years or so, I feel like has served more to divide than unite. Emma, I think, yeah, can we go back? Thank you. Colfax has served to divide the city between north and south more than unite. And it's just acted as a highway, a way to get from east to west. And so trying to cross Colfax, you know, it's on the high injury network that that Rolf was talking about earlier. And so having bus only lanes helps connect the north and the south along Colfax, makes it easier to cross. It makes it more attractive to hang out in the area and connect with your neighbors. And another thing there's a lot of economic benefits too, right? There's a bus travel time savings. We're talking up to 30 minutes of travel time savings for the bus as compared to how it currently operates. So it provides a more economical way. It moves people faster. It does so more cost effectively than cars do. And so it enhances access to jobs and services. And also there's a host of environmental benefits to this as well. Buses move more people with fewer vehicles. So that means less greenhouse gas emissions. So that's improvements to air quality. Less traffic moving along Colfax means lower noise. So this promotes greener streets, which is beneficial to humans. That means we're designing the street for people instead of moving goods and freight through east to west through the city. Let's go to the next slide. This is the layout and where the bus stations will be located. There's really 3 different phases of the project. I mean, not phases really, but there's 3 different characteristics of the project. There's the yellow portion on the left. That'll be a side running bus rapid transit. There's existing bus only lanes in this area now. This is the downtown section. It's not going to look visually a whole lot different than it currently does now. We'll add the links branding, which that's going to be the name of all the bus rapid transit lines in the area, in the Front Range area. But not a whole lot different than that. And then in the blue segment, this is going to be center running with 2 lanes that are bus only lanes. And so this is going to look a lot different than the way it currently looks now. So these are center running stations, and yeah, that's the blue section. And then the orange section on the right, that's the section that's in the city of Aurora. It goes back to a side running bus rapid transit at that point. There's going to be a couple of flagship stations is what we're calling it along that segment. But yeah, it'll be mixed flow, as in there won't be bus only lanes on the side. So it's going to look similar to today, but there's going to be some of the benefits that comes along with being bus rapid transit. And so let's talk about what those benefits are. Let's go to the next slide. So these are some of the key features of having a bus rapid transit. And these are all different improvements to help a bus move faster through a city. And all of these little things add up to lots of savings, that 30 minutes of savings time if you're moving through Denver. One of the big ones is called transit signal priority. And that is, there's a little device on the bus. And when it comes up to a traffic signal, if it's getting ready to turn red, it's going to hold off on turning red and stay green for just enough time to let that bus get through the traffic signal. And that helps to speed up the travel time. Also, there's level boarding, so the bus stations are elevated up. There's BRT branding. Fare collection happens at the bus stations instead of on the bus, so that allows people to get on and off a lot quicker. We have bus only lanes, and the plan is to have specialized vehicles as well. We're going to have the 60-foot accordion style buses for this line as well. Let's move on. So the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project is the first of several BRT lines planned in the area. We have Colorado Boulevard, Federal Boulevard, Alameda, Spear, a number of others. I know that Colorado and Federal are being prioritized. Those are next up to get built. I think maybe Federal quicker than Colorado, although we'd have to ask our friends at CDOT for that specifically. But this is part of a plan to prioritize transit even more in the Front Range area. Let's go to the next slide. So where is this project specifically, the Colfax BRT project? We've been working pretty hard going through an FTA funding process. Basically, we identified the ability for this project to join into the Small Starts program by the Federal Transit Administration. And as part of that, we had to go through an environmental review. That's what the NEPA review is called. We're still going through that process now. And in this past August, last August 2022, we turned in our rating application to FTA. And in March of 2023, we received our rating from FTA. We received a high rating. There's over 40 projects in the Small Starts program. We were one of 3 to receive that high rating. So we think that's a really big deal, because what that means is FTA agrees with us that Colfax is a great candidate for having a bus rapid transit project. Also in July, we submitted what we call is the categorical exclusion. It's a certain type of environmental review required for federal projects. This isn't expected to have any kind of large traditional environmental impact, so we're eligible to submit for a categorical exclusion. It doesn't mean there's no environmental review. I promise we're still going through a serious environmental review, and we're still doing that now. Also in July, and I think in July and August, we onboarded a contractor, And so we wanted to have a certain kind of contracting method where we get the contractor on board to help us put together the design so we can figure out the most cost-effective way to do that. So we got them under contract just recently, and they're working with us to help make the design more cost-effective so we get more bang for our buck for this project. This fall, we're going to be submitting a variety of materials, a bunch of plans and reports to FTA that shows that the project is ready to go to construction. We're going to be submitting those over the next couple of months. And we plan those will get reviewed, we'll get comments back. We expect to be through that process of demonstrating project readiness around the end of the year. And also we'll be completing 90% design in January of 24. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the project is estimated to cost $255 million. Big project, right? We're getting more and more comfortable and confident that that is going to be the budgeted cost for this project. For federal funds, we're looking to get about $127 million from the Federal Transit Administration for that Small Starts grant. That's the process we're in now, demonstrating this project is ready for construction to receive that $127 million. To get that, we need to have a 50% match of local funds, and that's coming from a variety of different sources. Mostly it's coming from the Elevate Denver bond, $65.5 million coming from there. We've received a grant from the Denver Regional Council of Governments for $28.4 million. The city of Aurora is putting in $14.5 million for their portion of the project. And we've identified additional Denver funding from a couple of different sources, totaling up just under $20 million for a total of about, well, $128.1 million is the local match. Let's go to the next slide. So where are we headed? I kind of talked about what has happened on the left side. And right now we're in the final design process. Like I said before, January 2024, we look to have 90% design complete. And then we are going to be starting construction this coming summer, actually, I guess, because summer's almost over. This summer is. Anyway, we'll be going to construction in the summer of 2024. And so as part of that, we're going to be submitting for our official request for funding from FTA. That'll take a little while to work out that paperwork and have our contracts with our contractor set up. And so that's why summer 2024 is where we're aiming to start construction. The construction will take place in phases over the next 2.5 years. And we expect revenue operations for the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit to begin in January 2027. So that is the current schedule. And I think that's the last slide, Emma. Is that? Yeah. And so we have Charlie to talk about the transportation and safety analysis. And Emma, do you have anything you want to say before Charlie starts up?
Just noting, Charlie, that we have about 5 minutes still allocated. Yep. So I would, okay.
I'll do as quickly
that's okay,
as
John.
possible.
Thanks so much. You're good.
Cool.
Thanks.
Emma, I'm good on audio?
Yep.
Good, great. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you, Emma. So the transportation report for the East Colfax Avenue BRT project was released earlier this year. And the purpose of this report is really to understand what the project's effects are on all the different people and modes that move through the corridor. And also to identify, for any effects that we do have that may be perceived as negative, what strategies we might have for addressing those. There's a variety of methods we use for these that I won't go into for the sake of time, but Suffice to say that this was done per the state of the practice to meet all of the requirements of the Colorado Department of Transportation, the National Policy Act, Environmental Policy Act, and FTA. So starting at the top with some of the benefits that people in the corridor will experience, a lot of travel time savings. One of the things that we found in our analysis is that certainly now, but very much into the future, without the project buses, the 15 and the 15L on the corridor will incur quite a bit of delay. Emma, can you go back for me? There it is. The project itself with the center running lanes in the Denver segment will save a lot of travel time. By 2040, that full corridor length of travel time savings in the peak hour and the peak direction will be up to 30 minutes. For the average passenger traveling approximately 3 miles along the corridor, that works out to 10 minutes peak hour, peak direction. And the combined benefit of the travel time savings, as well as all of the other investments that John described, contributes to an overall increase in ridership on the bus of between 24 and 31%. There's a variety of things the project is doing to improve safety and reduce crashes on this high entry network street. Obviously, the increase in transit passengers and ridership has a positive effect on the city's mode shift goals. And all of that also has associated environmental benefits when we're reducing vehicle miles of travel and therefore reducing the amount of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted on the corridor. For this benefit, there are some acknowledged effects to the project, and one of those that many of you may have heard in our communications previously is that we do expect an increase in vehicle travel time in the area. Generally speaking, our analysis has found that even without building the Colfax BRT project and without the lane repurposing, there is going to be an increase in congestion and travel time in the area. So with or without the project, we will see some increase. With the project, we expect that increase to be in the magnitude of approximately 1 additional minute per mile traveled through the study area if you're traveling in the peak hour in the peak direction. If you're traveling off peak or in the non-peak direction, that effect is much lower. We've noted different travel time scenarios for the different corridors here, but I will go to the next slide for the sake of time. One of the things that is both is certainly a benefit of the project from a safety standpoint, but also is going to be noticed by many of the communities, is that we are managing access on the corridor with a median between the 2 directions of travel, which ultimately will manage access so that people can only make left turns at signalized intersections along the corridor. Many of the corridor's crashes today are related to left turns from the minor street onto Colfax or left turns off of Colfax. So the median itself not only has benefits for mitigating crashes related to left turns up and down the Colfax corridor. It also provides a point of refuge for pedestrians who choose to cross outside of a marked crosswalk, and has benefits for transit as well. So this is just an image showing the configuration of the median between the signalized intersections rather, and in the case of Colorado and Colfax, how the left turns will be configured around the stations at many of the signalized intersections. We are currently completing what's called a curbside access plan for the corridor. And generally speaking, the question that this project or this part of the effort is aiming to answer is there are many on-street parking spaces on Colfax today. And with this significant of a project, we need to rethink all of the different regulations in place that affect how people use that curb. So we had our most recent public meeting on this just on Tuesday night, 2 nights ago, and really helping work with the community to understand how we reconfigure all of those spaces, recognizing that in many segments of the corridor, there will be a net reduction in parking spaces. particularly in the west part of the corridor from Broadway to Colorado. We are, as I mentioned, we had our public meeting earlier this week and are aiming to have draft recommendations available later this fall.
Thanks, Charlie. Joel, that concludes our formal presentation. In the sake of time, I will just leave this up for anyone who's interested in connecting with the project moving forward, but I'll turn it back to you to facilitate some Q&A.
Thanks very much. We had a question from Rob that I think has been on a lot of nearby residents' minds about extra traffic being directed to the side streets. I'll just throw it to you, Charlie. You've been studying that in the plan that you showed us the cover for. Can you give us kind of a summary of how that looks and what mitigations are possible?
Yeah, I'm assuming that by side streets, Rob means like the intersecting north-south streets in a lot of cases, but
north-south streets, and that's a good point. Parallel streets as well. If
Yeah.
Automobile traffic will be increasing, what's the knock-on effect and
Yeah.
how much? Because as I don't, I didn't let Rob read his question, but he said in other cities, when really good transit like this comes in, there's a certain amount of car traffic evaporation. It doesn't just go
Yeah.
somewhere else. People change modes.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we projected in the transportation report in terms of, you know, the shift in traffic off of Colfax and potentially onto those parallel streets, 13th, 14th, 17th, 18th, you know, that's the contributing effect that gives us that increase in 1 minute or so of travel time through the study area. So what we put in the transportation report and the way we analyzed it probably represents sort of an upper limit or a worst case in what we would expect there. In reality, you know, what we see and what we monitor over time may be somewhere between what we have now and you know, what we think is maybe a worst case. So to a large extent, I think that will be most felt on the east-west parallel streets. The north-south streets, I think those effects will be generally less and a little bit nuanced. In a lot of cases, people that are, you know, using Colfax as their through corridor today, if they choose to use, you know, another corridor, that doesn't necessarily change how they choose to travel on the north-south streets to maybe some of their ultimate destinations. But we also recognize that with the management of access and left turns on Colfax, that there's, you know, a few more vehicles that are going to be pushed onto some of the streets where the signals remain. All to say, two of the things that we're doing in the project, one right now is safety study of Colfax and the parallel streets. We're just wrapping that up now for Colfax itself to make sure we do absolutely everything we can on Colfax from a safety perspective. We're going to start expanding that to the parallel streets this fall so that we can start to understand ways of improving safety and mitigating any concerns related to spillover traffic on the parallel corridors, and then also ongoing monitoring in the area, recognizing that many of the changes in behaviors of how people travel are difficult to predict. So rather than spending a lot of money trying to, you know, solve something that we can't necessarily predict, let's make sure we do a great job of monitoring it. And obviously for those we can predict, let's get ahead of those. But for those that we can't, let's monitor and make sure we're resolving those over time. So that's the dialogue that the project team is currently having pertaining to that question.
Okay, and it sounds like that, as you said, that analysis is still wrapping up. It's not quite done yet, but thanks for telling us about your posture on that. June had a question about Aurora. June? You can unmute. I'm sorry, we're not hearing you. I see that you're unmuted, but we're not hearing you. I'll just summarize it. June was asking if the design is designed to evolve in Aurora. If they look at the dedicated lanes and they want to move to dedicated lanes, can they do that in the future?
I'll go ahead and answer that, Charlie. And the answer is yes, absolutely. If they wanted to have bus-only lanes in the future, there's certainly the possibility for that to happen in a future phase. It's just currently not funded. Mostly, if the project ends up being a success, which we are confident that it will, then I'm confident that Aurora will have bus only lanes in the future, but there's a lot to figure out as far as funding for that to happen.
Great. We'll do 2 rapid fire ones. James, do you still have a question about time savings?
Hey, thanks. I think part of it was addressed. So obviously, so I'm with a group called Creative Denver Transit. We're really excited about Colfax BRT. We just want to make sure that we're like selling the time savings accurately. Is the 30 minutes? I guess it's not over current 15 or 15L times. It's a distant. It's more of in the future where traffic gets a lot worse on Colfax. So how, like, I guess the way that this would be helpful for us is, what is the journey time that you're using kind of as the baseline for Colfax? And then how does kind of increasing the travel time by about a minute a mile get us to 30-minute savings by 2040?
Yeah. So the projected travel time for the bus, I think it's between Broadway and 225, is 35 minutes. So whether, you know, existing plus project or 2040 plus project with the exclusive lanes, that does not change. That's a 35-minute travel time for buses. And yes, the 30-minute savings, peak hour, peak direction, that is by 2040. We found, I'm just looking at the transportation report, that in the existing existing build year, the savings is 15 minutes, peak hour, peak direction. So to some extent, it's that traffic growth. That 1 minute of, so period there on the transit travel time portion of it, the 1 minute of increased travel time in the area more broadly relates to travel time for vehicles traveling through the area, personal vehicles, not transit vehicles.
Got it. Appreciate it.
Thanks. I just, we're running a little over. Our first speaker had some technical issues, so we're a little bit behind, but thank you so much for staying with us. You are welcome to stay, both to listen to the next presentations and to answer more questions in the chat. We had just one observation I want to point out. Jason Schaefer believes that the estimated ridership increases are very modest based on what other cities have seen. And yet, on social media this past week or so, I saw someone had clipped from the federal funding requests the ridership and the costs, and it was just clear how competitive this is, even if you're being conservative about the ridership increases. So I really hope we get, it'd be great if the Fed said, would you like more money than you're asking for? That'd be a good problem to have. Thank you so much. We're going to move to our next presentation. All right, our third presentation tonight is a returning presenter, Scott Burton. And Scott has talked to us in the past about a few different topics, but he's really, I know him largely as the parking trade-offs, curb lane kind of person. And in my neighborhood and in Baker, he was engaged in effort, and many since then, he's been engaged in efforts for parking management plans. But the department is taking a broader look at this and is renaming its curb lane access plan, because it really acknowledges all the different things we use the curb for, not just parking. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. I do have a little bit of a cough. I was at a Colfax BRT Curbside Access Plan meeting on Tuesday, and I could hardly get a sentence out. Thankfully, I'm feeling much better, so hopefully I can get through it. But it's good to be here again. Scott Burton with the City of Denver. So good evening. Thanks for having us. As Joel mentioned, last time we were here, I think it was March or April of 2022 when we were discussing the residential parking permit program. So it's been a while. It's nice to be back. And before we get started, I wanted Jessica Hernandez with Consor is with me tonight. Wanted her to have an opportunity to introduce herself.
Hello, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, like Scott said, I'm Jessica Hernandez. I'm a transportation planner with Consor, and I've been supporting Scott and his team on this plan.
Thank you.
And
you both have the ability to share your screens if either one of you were planning to do that. And while you're doing that, I'll just acknowledge we've had over 40 people on tonight. This is a really good turnout for our meetings, and it's raining out and people across the city can easily join by Zoom. So
there we are. Yeah, so thanks, Jess. So yeah, we're here today to talk about the Curbside Action Plan. Can everybody see my screen? Hopefully it looks like we're all set there. Yeah.
Yes, that's fine.
So we're discussing the curbside action plan, not to be confused with all the curbside access plans that we're conducting citywide also. So there's two caps and it can be confusing sometimes, but this is our curbside action plan. This effort kicked off a little over a year ago. And in terms of what we'd like to discuss with you all today, we will provide a overview of the project timeline and schedule, outcomes, core values, a little bit about process, kind of getting at planning synthesis that was conducted, some of the peer city research and focus groups that were held, and then the curbside guidance. That's what we'll spend most of our time on, and then a little bit about recommendations and next steps towards the end. So in terms of our curbside access plan schedule and overview, at a high level, we developed goals and objectives and a vision statement early on in the process. We reviewed lots of previous planning documents that were in progress or were completed to look for opportunities to align and partner. From a curbside and parking management perspective, we conducted best practices research, a lot of peer city interviews. And we're now in the process of refining our recommendations and our curbside guidance. And let's see, with that, I'll move forward to why are we doing this plan? So as we know, the curbside is under increasing demand. They are transit lanes. They are bus rapid transit lanes. There are bike lanes. There's a lot of demand for the limited resource that is the curb here in the city of Denver. And I think curbside demands have evolved a lot in the 8 years I've been with the city. They've evolved a lot since COVID. I always like to think before COVID, we were focused solely on Uber and Lyft and rideshare demand. And now it's just so much more than that. It's so much more than I ever imagined and envisioned 4 years ago. So there's so many demands they've been involving. We have rideshare, we have food delivery, which we didn't really have significantly, at least a few years ago. There's shared bikes and scooters, outdoor dining, mobile commerce, and then, as I mentioned, bus lanes and protected bike lanes as well. So some of the project outcomes. In terms of outcomes, this is an action-oriented and implementation-oriented plan that is identifying short and long-term projects. This will include pilot projects as well, and curbside priority guidance by street type and then policy needs. So that's our effort in a nutshell from an outcome perspective. And then, as I mentioned early on, we did create a vision statement, but today I wanted to just share our core values with you. So our core values include highest and best use, accessible and equitable, flexible and accommodating, innovative and dynamic, effective and consistent, and resilient and inviting. And so I wanted to share this with you just to show how our core values connect with the goals of Denver Moves Everyone. So early on, we did conduct a pretty thorough planning synthesis to identify opportunities to align our effort with previous planning efforts from a curbside and parking perspective. And this just illustrates some of the planning efforts that we looked at. So we looked at Blueprint, and that was pretty influential, as you'll see shortly. Obviously, Denver Moves Everyone, Denver Complete Streets Guidelines, Denver Moves Downtown, some of the neighborhood planning initiatives, Vision Zero, and then our strategic parking plan that was conducted in 2010. So this curbside action plan is really replacing or modernizing the strategic parking plan, if any of you are familiar with that document. So we conducted peer cities and we talked with all these cities. We received a lot of great information. Some of that information will influence the curbside guidance that we'll share with you shortly. Some of that information will influence the recommendations that we're in the process of refining, but we met with Washington, Seattle, Boulder, Minneapolis, San Francisco, Columbus, Des Moines, Santa Monica, and Atlanta. And I feel like there might have been one more, but that's likely it. Regardless, we also assembled 4 focus groups with 4 themes. So we assembled a downtown event-based oriented focus group, and then a loading and a mobility groups as well. And so we met with them once. We'll be meeting with them again, coincidentally, next week. And we've received a ton of great feedback through those conversations. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So we have a lot of information to give you about this curbside guidance that we are in the process of developing. And so I'm going to try to stay high level for time, but we have on our slides images that will show you a lot of information in case people want to ask more questions. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that there's going to be a lot of information on these slides, but I'm not going to dig into all of it. So as Scott said, we did a really deep dive into all of the different planning guidance, and these are the main guides, main framework for our curbside plan. Blueprint Denver, you know, that's the main document, the land use and transportation plan. And really what that does is provides the biggest framework. And then there's the complete streets design guidelines, which started to lay out what priorities there are for different curb uses on the curbs and on these different streets. And then Denver Moves Everyone has provided even a little bit more detail to what should be on curbside guidance. And then finally, these are all, we're just kind of, I almost think about it as we just keep on putting more layers of detail inside of this framework that was first started by Blueprint Denver. So our curbside guidance has 3 elements. The curb use selection guide, which is really the opportunity to provide information or prioritization, a hierarchy for what curb uses are most appropriate or most prioritized for different streets in Denver. And so we'll show you that in a little bit. That's probably the newest information that we're sharing tonight. And then in connection to that, we also are providing curbside TDM, transportation demand management strategies. And these are just really to support or encourage different alternative uses, alternative modes of travel. So rather than driving a car, what types of different strategies can support a choice to walk or bike or take transit? And then also a curbside and parking toolkit, which outlines how the curbside and parking staff have already been making decisions around parking management. It really kind of memorializes it as well and provides some methodology and some background and different tools that the curbside and parking team is using. So on the left, probably everybody's seen this. This is sometimes it's called the inverted pyramid. And this is really the priority that Denver sees for different modes on streets, with people being prioritized first. And so you can see that top section of the pyramid, that's people walking or rolling. And that's because almost every trip, really every trip that you take, you start and end as a pedestrian, whether you're getting in and out of your car, whether you're just walking the whole trip or taking transit. But just as important are bikes, people riding bikes, people taking transit. And then under that is the movement of goods and services throughout the streets. And then at the lowest priority are private vehicles, single occupant vehicles. So this is the kind of that overall guide to what should be the priorities on the streets. And then if you look on the right, you can see what we're calling curbside functions, which these are categories of curbside uses. So at the highest priority, matching kind of that people first, is access for people. And then if you start to read, and I know it's kind of small, this is what I was saying about lots of information. Some curb uses that match with these are bicycle and mobility, parking, car share parking, passenger pickup and drop off, like Ubers and Lyfts. And then access for commerce would be loading, activation, things like outdoor dining or food trucks, mobile commerce, other retail trucks. Vehicle parking being the lowest priority of what we have categorized. And then there's some uses that are just universal, that are the highest priority and always considered. So ADA access. And then some curb uses that are determined that will take up priority on curbs, but are determined outside of this hierarchy. So that's things like bus lanes, bike lanes, transit stops, green infrastructure, and then anything safety improvements like curb extensions, mid-block crossings. So what we've done is come up with a prioritization based on this framework for the 6 different types of streets that are in Blueprint Denver. So these streets also have some functional classifications. So downtown street can be an arterial or a collector, but generally we're looking at downtown streets and its prioritization outside of the functional classifications. So you can see here that on downtown versus mixed use streets, both of them would have the highest priority being people and access for people. But in downtown streets, different access for commerce, like those loading zones would be a little bit of a higher priority than on a mixed use street. Activation like outdoor dining or food trucks would be a little higher. You can see on residential and local streets, vehicle parking is the highest priority, and it changes on commercial and industrial. So on the left, we have the steps of how you would go through the curb use guide, which I'll walk through in a few minutes. Sorry, Scott. So this is an example for a downtown street of the curbside hierarchy, or what we're calling our curb use selection guide. This is how you would walk through it. And so if you take a look, this is almost, you can consider this like a bar chart in a sense, except for that this is the distribution of the spaces along the streets. So you might look at a street in isolation, a block of a street. It might be a block face, but generally what we'd like you to do when you look at this is understand that streets and blocks, adjacent streets, interact with each other. And so some curb uses might be actually accommodated on adjacent streets. And so if you're looking in a small area that's, the distance that when you park your bike or when you are going to your destination, that you kind of would want to have all of these uses, that's kind of the area that this covers. The other thing to understand as you're looking at this is that the highest priorities, which are at the top of this distribution bar chart, are not always the most frequent uses. So if you see, the lowest priority is vehicle parking. However, on most streets, it will be probably that most frequent use. So looking from top to bottom is priority, but then the width or the distance on that bar chart is how much of those different curb uses would be on a block or a series of blocks. So for downtown, I'm just going to kind of walk through. On the left, you can see that these are those categories, and that's the priority of the categories. And then on the right are actually the curb uses within those categories that are prioritized. So for example, ADA parking should be about 2% of all the parking spaces, but this might be accommodated by some off-street parking as well. And then bike parking, which is bicycle, micromobility, scooter parking, cargo bike parking. This is the highest priority below that on downtown streets. And there should be a decent amount of it. And we're recommending that on every block in a downtown street, whether it's above or below curb, and most often located at intersections. Then under that, passenger drop off and pickup, car share parking, and car share parking might not be on every street. Car share parking is something that, while it's a high priority, it needs to be requested by a car share company. Flex zones is this red that has that parking symbol inside of it, and that is a new curbside use that is being recommended through or proposed through this curbside action plan. A flex zone is a parking space that allows a number of different uses. It's right now we're proposing it to be up to 15 minutes, and you could park a private vehicle and leave your private vehicle parked there, get out of it, run in, get a quick cup of coffee, run back to your car, or maybe you've ordered some food from a restaurant. It could also be you picking up a passenger, picking up your kid from school or from their workplace. It could be a commercial parking space, so a commercial vehicle could park there, or an Uber or Lyft could drop off or pick up in these spaces. And so the idea is to really use the curbside as efficiently as possible. And so in these very urban areas where a lot of these different uses are going on, it's a great way to really provide a lot of opportunities for these types of quick turnover uses. So in a case like a downtown street, if there are a lot of flex zones, you might not need the passenger pickup and drop off because it's accommodated in the flex zone, or you might not need as much commercial loading because it's accommodated in the flex zone. Below that are activation uses, and then finally private vehicle parking. So if we go to the next slide, we have an example, and I am not going to run through this whole example, but this is an example of how you might use this guideline. And so we're kind of showing this just to show that there's a lot of information and really a lot of details about how to implement this new guidance. So an example would be, and this happens very frequently, that the city receives a request for more loading. And in this case, we're saying in Rhino. And the street that the request has come through for is a mixed use street. And so while mixed use and downtown streets are very similar, some examples of mixed use streets are Grant from 20th to 3rd, or Federal 20th to Floyd, or East First from University to Steele. So it's that mixed use land use, but they act very similar to a downtown street. So you can kind of see that here, where you can see the distribution is similar to what I just showed you with the downtown use, but outdoor places, outdoor dining, outdoor seating would be, and mobile commerce is a little bit of a higher priority. So in this case, you would walk through, and you can see we also have existing on here, and this is how our streets look, right? A lot of private parking on our streets today. And so generally, when you put in a new use, what gets repurposed is the private vehicle parking. And in this case, asking for a loading zone, going through thanks, Joel, I'll be really fast. Going through all of the different uses, we would recommend a flex zone because it can accommodate loading, but it can also accommodate some of those other important things like passenger pickup and drop off. And after you determine what use, we've come up with these design consideration sheets that really just provide a lot of information about how it would be implemented. Very specific links to those specific standards and specifications, where it might be located, how long it would take to actually construct it, and cost, things like that. And each curb use has a sheet like this. And then we have two other sections, like I said, two elements, the curbside and parking toolkit. And this really goes through how decisions are made about parking management, and then different ways that you would, different tools and ways that you can manage the parking the most efficiently, so that you're using the least amount of parking, the least amount of curbside for vehicle parking, and allowing these other more active uses that the city is starting to incorporate into their curbs. And then finally, we have our transportation demand management strategies, which again, support all of these other uses modes that you might want to take to get to your destination. And it's a big list, and it just has some examples and things like that, just kind of as a guide. So I'm going to move over to Scott now to go through recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Yeah, so as Jess mentioned, a lot here to cover. And so recommendations, we're not going to share specific recommendations today because we're in the process of kind of refining our recommendations now that we've gotten our guidance pretty much finalized. But some of the categories that we're looking at are ADA and accessibility recommendations, some EV recommendations, paid on street parking, loading, short-term use, a lot of loading oriented recommendations, and a lot of recommendations around bike and scooter parking as well, asset management, user support, and signage. And so we are really turning our attention to the recommendations now, with the thought that we will be wrapping this up at some point later this fall. So we have another stakeholder working group meeting next week, and we are meeting with focus groups as well. And then we will have one more stakeholder and PMT. We'll have another PMT and stakeholder working group meeting, and then be finalizing our recommendations this fall, and then can share a draft of the plan and the recommendations and all the associated guidance documents with you all at some point here in the next few months, once we're wrapped up.
Great, thank you very much. There was a couple questions about bikes and scooters from David Mincer. David?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I just think it's really important to get bikes and scooters off the sidewalk. So I was wondering, under what circumstances would they recommend corrals on the street versus on the sidewalk, especially at intersections where there's no car parking currently anyway?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is a priority for DOTI, is to place those corrals and those no parking zones at the intersections when possible. As you mentioned, if the intersection has been designed correctly, there should be 20 to 30 feet of daylighting on each leg, and so plenty of room in those areas for these corrals below curb.
Okay, thank you. John, Ricky had a couple questions, but then he's writing me. John, do you want to ask them or do you want me to read them out?
Please, you. I'm sick.
Oh, you do sound sick. Okay, so his first question was, is there any part of the plan that calls for less unpriced parking? And one framing I would suggest for this is when you talked about priorities, priority didn't mean how much of the street it's used for, but I think priority might mean we will certainly do these things if the context calls for it, and the remainder is available for general parking. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, you got it, Joel.
So it's trading off against unpriced parking. Okay, and then his next question really gets to this pricing issue, the use of parking meters. So really putting where appropriate, when appropriate, does this have more guidance on when it makes sense to put cost to this valuable resource?
That will be part of this as well. And I would say moving forward, one of our priorities is to use use multi-space meters. So if any of you have been in Cherry Creek in the last year and a half, you've likely noticed that we removed a lot of the single space meters and installed multi-space meters, and really relying on the multi-space and pay by phone for payment options.
Okay, so there'll be recommendations as to where in the city, what typologies that might be appropriate for.
Correct. And I think in addition, like thresholds. So what's the threshold where the city would likely pursue paid parking when, your traditional untimed time limit is not effective enough in managing that demand, and where's the threshold to move you towards paid parking and away from just time limits.
Okay, and I know there was something in the press in the past year about the long-standing, but a lot of people don't know about it. It's almost has a folklore element of for unpaid parking on the street, like in a neighborhood, you still have to move your vehicle every once in a while. And I think there was some city council back and forth of how does that work and whatever. Are there changes there, or is that still an important element of the valuable street parking not being consumed forever?
You're referring to what we call the 72-hour rule, and that's an ordinance that requires vehicles to move every 72 hours. And there's a lot of discussion, or have been a lot of discussions in recent months about that. I don't think anything's changing at this point, but I can't be certain. It's been a hot topic lately.
Okay. June has asked me to read her question because the microphone isn't working. Are there current plans to increase daylighting requirements, meaning increasing the area surrounding intersections where private vehicles can't be parked? I find this especially important for biking comfort on local roads.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. And so we're conducting a variety of different curbside access plans throughout the city. And those are just neighborhood wide or area wide comprehensive curbside and parking plans. And one of the goals with just about every plan we've worked on is making sure that adequate daylighting exists at those intersections. So oftentimes you might have a no parking sign, but it was installed on a utility pole that's 10 feet from the intersection, but we put it on a utility pole instead of installing our own. And so now it's really making sure that there's at least 20 feet of daylighting at each intersection, and more in some cases, depending on other obstructions and driveways and other things that might warrant more daylighting than just 20 feet.
Yeah, and it gives that natural place for bike scooter corrals, as you mentioned.
That's what we like about using the no parking zones for the bike parking, is because we're not taking any vehicle parking spaces, because the people are sensitive to that, as you know.
Yeah, it doesn't obstruct the visibility,
right?
In the same way. Lucia has a question.
Hi, I was wondering if there was any consideration of putting meters in residential areas that have high parking demand. Right now, or as far as I remember, you don't put parking meters in residential, but if there's areas that have really high demand, is that something that would be considered?
Yeah, that's true to some extent. I think we are looking to expand our paid parking footprint end of this year, early 2024 in the low-high portion of the Highland neighborhood. So that's high density residential and mixed use. And we're looking at I think it's about 400 paid parking spaces in that area. And then we're also looking at portions of Rhino and 5 Points as well.
Great. Well, those are the questions that I saw in the chat. Your presentation had a lot of fine detail, and I know the final plan will be coming out, but I've gotten several requests if you could send us the slides for me to distribute, just because they're very dense to read on the screen.
Yeah, sure thing, Joel. I'll send you a PDF of the presentation.
Thank you so much. And thank you both, Scott, Jessica, for being here this evening.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
All right.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Have a good evening. It's important work. Our final speaker tonight is Natriece Bryant. I've gotten to know Natriece a bit over the past year through one of my other volunteer activities. I volunteer as a board member for the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, CTIO. Most of what CTIO does as an enterprise within CDOT is operate the managed lanes throughout the express lanes, as they're called, throughout the state. But one of the very interesting things CTIO is involved in is Burnham Yard, and we have not yet had a presentation on this. And Natriece, who's with the state of Colorado, is the perfect person to give the big picture overview of the place and the transportation moves that are being planned as it and before it leads into what we would in Denver know of as our traditional neighborhood planning effort. Natriece, welcome.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks for having me. Good evening, everybody. Like Joel said, my name is Natriece Bryant. I'm the Public-Private Partnership Director for the state of Colorado. And with this Burnham Yard project, there's a couple of phases that I would like to update you all on, and then also start going through some of our next steps as we start to move forward. So you'll see on the slide deck that there's a picture that kind of just provides the scope of what area we're working with. I'm not assuming that everybody knows where it is, so there might be a couple of slides that go through a little bit of detail about the location. But one of the things that we're really considering in this project is how many different aspects and different places that we touch. So I'm going to give a little bit of a description on where we are and where we started. So as most of you know, Burnham Yard was a former repair and rail yard that was owned by Union Pacific and then other rail companies. In 2021, the state of Colorado purchased Burnham Yard from Union Pacific Railroad. And in that time, we had some discussions about what could this site be in regard to redevelopment. In 2022, CTIO, which is our Colorado Transportation Investment Office within CDOT, that's also an arm of CDOT, started to do a transportation study. And I'll go through a little bit of information in regard to what that transportation study means, and then where we're moving in 2023, which is when my office hired WSP, which is our owner's rep, to represent how we can really have some true community engagement and true understanding of what this neighborhood has, what they want, and what they need. And so that's going to be a really important aspect as we're going through the slide deck that talks a little bit about where we are and how we're going to get to the next steps. Joel, I just want to make sure my slides are moving. Are they moving?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure. Sometimes technology is hard. So within our transportation study, one of the things that we started doing over the last 10 months is looking at the technical aspects of the railroad. We have BNSF, Union Pacific, and RTD that are currently located on that yard. Right off of 10th and Osage is the RTD light rail line, and then you have the consolidated main line, and then you have BNSF and UP that kind of utilize both of the space that's adjacent to that property. This map shows you a little bit about where the current rail sits, and you'll see that it creates almost an island. Well, it does create an island. And so how do we gain access to that island, and how do we open up the opportunities for this community to really start looking into what can we do with Baker? How do we connect Baker, Lom, Lincoln, Valverde, all of those different neighborhoods to this property and kind of make it, you know, what it could be? It's 58 acres of land, so there's a lot of land for us to work with, but we do need to start looking at what we're doing with the consolidated main line as well as RTD. So within this study, we had 5 really clear goals that we needed to look at that we really focused on as we were looking at where can we utilize and put a preferred alternative for how these rails are actually aligned. The first one was access and network. The main thing we wanted to look at here was to provide reasonable access to transportation facilities, but also enhance the mobility and also provide operational improvements to this yard by having it open up and not be isolated as an island. This will also give community members more transportation choices as well as transportation equity. As we know, and as you all are probably well aware, transportation has historically been utilized to divide communities, specifically communities that have been disenfranchised. And so that is one of the main things we want to ensure does not happen in this redevelopment effort. Our second goal was environment. With looking at environment, we wanted to avoid and minimize and mitigate any adverse effects that impacted the neighborhoods. So that's why you see us going out to the RNOs, having different conversations with community members, which I'll talk about in a moment, to really make sure that, one, there's access to water, depending on what type of development we decide to do there. How long has that water line not been accessed? And so we want to make sure that there's definitely, some consideration there. We also had trains running through this site for years, decades. And so what does that look like from an environmental perspective? NEPA will need to be done on this site, and we'll need to figure out what is underground, how much can we dig, what needs to be mitigated. So environment was one of our important aspects as well. The third goal was looking at community. It was important for us to support community plans, but also look at the aspirations of this site and ensure that the government wasn't just coming in and saying, this is what we want to build, but looking at what community needs and what community would like to be there. So that's why you'll see some heavy stakeholder engagement in our next phase, which is our master planning process. The fourth goal was safety. Safety was really important to us because we've had several examples of rail safety not being great in community. We want to address existing and future and operational needs in the community and ensure that we're not putting rail right next to development. Make sure that we're putting things in places that make sense for community, but also follow the guidelines that we need to have in regard to rail safety. And then finally, the implementation component for the transportation planning study was important to us because we need to look at a cost-effective solution that can be implemented. This is not going to be a low-cost project. I want to just make that very clear. We have a large number of rail that we're trying to move. We have a lot of different options that I'll show you in a moment that look through some of our different rail alignments. And those things are not going to be inexpensive. So we need to go after grant dollars. We partner with the City and County of Denver on a regular basis to ensure that we are connecting where necessary and going after grant funding. We have a lot of IIJA dollars that we can access right now. And so we need to take advantage of all the different federal funding sources and local government sources that we have to be able to improve and implement this project. So that's another thing that's really important to us. I'm going to show you three alignments that we've looked at. We have stakeholdered this slightly with neighboring businesses as well as community members. These are still in draft form, so I just want to be clear about that. There are things that we still need to look at, but I do want you to see what we've seen so far. You'll notice in alignment 1 that this moves the light rail line to the west side of the property. From feedback and engagement with community members as well as local businesses, and RTD and BNSF, one of the things that we heard is the development that's occurred with Denver Housing Authority was purposely put on the east side of the property to gain access and have transportation equity. Moving that rail to the other side of the property removes that access, and it almost creates a bigger island, if you notice that, on the west side of the parcel. And so that this alignment has not been seen as favorable in some situations. So we are stakeholdering this as we move forward. The second alignment, which is the alternative that people have tended to like a little bit more, you'll see it opens up the site much more than before. The green alternative on the east side of the property actually moves RTD into what we call a trenched option. It lowers it and it kind of opens the visibility. But we would also need to look at some of the things that RTD has brought up is how do we continue to not impact their service line as we're doing this project, because there would be some impact because it's literally in the same place as the current site, which is at grade. You'll see that the consolidated main line moves further west to the closer to I-25 and really does open up the connectivity for that site, making us have more redevelopable land than alternative 1. And then we have alternative 3, which keeps the Union Pacific lead line kind of going through the parcel and running on the west side. And then you'll see the pink lines talk about or go into overpasses and things of that nature. And you'll see that there's also a look at how 8th Avenue could either continue to be an elevated overpass, or we could bring it down to grade, which actually creates connectivity into the community and brings that road back into the community site. But those are the 3 that we're looking at right now. Again, like I said, these are still draft form. This is still being processed through the CTIO planning study, and we still are facilitating and working through this to determine what the preferred alternative would be with the railroads, the community, and the site as a whole. So where we're at now, we're looking at, we've moved forward, like I said, with the hiring of WSP as the owner's rep, and we're looking at moving forward with the master plan. So I've provided this slide to show a little bit of differentiation between what the state is doing as a whole. So we have CDOT and CTIO that are working on the rail alignment portion because they're transportation oriented. We have the Department of Personnel and Administration, which is where my organization sits in DPA, in the public-private partnership unit, and we're looking at, once we define that preferred alternative, what can we do for master planning purposes along with feeding into the City and County of Denver's small area plan, which they just recently started or had put out a solicitation to hire a firm to come in and do that study for them. And then we also still have NEPA. So we still need to feed this information into the consultant that would do the NEPA study. We still are working with the City and County of Denver, and there's a lot of moving aspects that are happening all at the same time that we have to make sure we collaborate on. One thing that was really important to our team is to ensure that when someone comes and talks about Burnham Yard, we come as a team effort. You'll see that we have team members from both City and County of Denver on this call. We have our consultant on this call, because the community doesn't understand if it's city government or state government. They just see government coming and talking about a project. So it's really important to us to have that connectivity when we're talking together and we're coming to community together to have the conversation, so that there's no message lost or message lost in transition as we're moving forward with the redevelopment model. So the master plan portion of the project is moving into looking at our equity study. We're also doing a market plan, and then we will look at those needs and generate the value as well as what the community benefit would be as we balance the needs for the enhanced rail portion. So you'll see a lot of things, and I'll show a slide in a moment that talks about how the alignment of the projects really are important to show master planning happening in conjunction with small area plan, in conjunction with the pre-transportation study that leads in and feeds into our environmental study that will tell us how we redevelop. We have a lot of things that we have to follow. We need to keep in consideration that there's a requirement of 10% minimum of open space required by the City and County of Denver as we start moving forward with redevelopment efforts. And so that is why it's so key for us to have everybody in the plan and working with us on the master plan to ensure that we have the understanding of what transportation equity might look like for us. Some of the things that we're looking at as we go through this study, we are looking at the Blueprint Denver study that's been done. We also have Denver Moves Everyone 2050 plan. And then we have our market analysis and community outreach engagement activities that I'll talk about in a moment. We know that there's going to be challenges with this site. There's environmental challenges, there's community benefit challenges, there's making sure that we're leveraging community benefit when we're coming up with redevelopment options. And we also want to have a targeted economic expansion as we move forward in the efforts that we're looking at. Affordability and density is important to us, so we're working with community to figure out what's necessary. We're walking the neighborhoods, we're utilizing community navigators to ensure that we have a true understanding of what's going up. I'm sure you've heard many projects that have talked about what's happening at the AHEC campus that feeds into Burnham Yard, what's happening with Front Range Passenger Rail. And so we're having those discussions to ensure that we are looking at everything as we decide what might be necessary for the redevelopment component. As you are probably also aware, there are several historic components to this site. We have historic buildings that are located on this site. And so how do we enhance those buildings and make sure that they're part of the redevelopment effort so that we don't lose that historic context when we're moving forward with the project? And then, of course, sustainability is our number one key. We do not want to build something that we cannot sustain. We do not want rail lines that we cannot maintain. And then we do not want any safety components to be jeopardized as we start to move forward with this project. So sustainability is also a very important and key factor for us as we move forward. A little bit of additional discussion on some of the challenges that we know we're going to face here. We have a very short time frame. So CDOT CTIO has a 3-year time frame in which we do not have to pay anything on this site. So we have until 2025-26 that we need to figure out what it is that the preferred alignment will be by working with community and what redevelopment efforts we have, whether we're going to keep the site, sell the site, whatever that looks like. And so that has to be done within a 3-year time frame. So we're on a very tight timeline that I'll go over in a moment to show why we're moving forward so quickly. We are in the beginning stages of this master plan project. So you all are one of the first groups that we're presenting to as we start moving into the master plan process. And then we have another community engagement event next Thursday or next week on the 20th that really starts to dig with community into our goals and objectives and how we're going to move forward with the residual site. As I said, it's one thing for government to come talk to folks about what we're doing. It's another thing for us to be in community. So you will see us utilizing stakeholder engagement through community navigators, those trusted voices that already understand the community, know the community, and are not coming as government sources to talk with folks. You'll see me at most in every one of these meetings, but we also are utilizing interpreters, we're using translators, we're using different forms of outreach and education to understand what the needs are in the community. We're looking at bike and ped. We're trying to figure out what do we need for crosswalks, how many at-grade crossings make sense, what's allowed for us. And so that's really going to be done through our community connector program. And that's in partnership with a couple of our subcontractors with WSP. We have CRL Associates, Buku West. So we have a strong group that understands the dynamics in that community. And so you see some photos of folks that we will be utilizing for that outreach component. So where are we? We are where the yellow thing says we are. We are here. So right before our presentation next week, which is our first engagement meeting, we have had a couple of stakeholder meetings that talked a little bit about, with the businesses, what the preferred alignment could be or what the alternative alignment might be. So we had meetings on June 15th and June 21st, which was kind of our project introduction that kind of feeds us out of the transportation plan and moves us into the stakeholder engagement and master plan. So we're at the very early stages. Our meeting on the 20th, we're going to be sourcing different goals that we have aligned with the City and County of Denver, and we're going to be sourcing those with community. What are we missing? What do you like about our goals? What did we completely miss? What should we add? And so that feedback session is really going to move us into the next portion, which will be in the fall, where we will take a lot of identified plan options and start moving into October stakeholders. These will all be in person and will all be at community centers. We are not asking people to come to government buildings at 12 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday. We're asking people to come to us, and we have a lot of different engagement options that I would encourage you all to take advantage of as well. We have an evaluation of options that we'll start doing in November through January. And then February through June, we're going to start looking at the preferred master plan as well as the vision for Burnham Yard. So we hope to have that completed by June of 2024, so that the City and County of Denver, as they're starting their small area plan in early 24, we are giving them information that we already have by doing some of the equity work that's necessary for this community. We're talking to RNOs. We've reached out and had conversations with every RNO. We're inviting people to meetings. We have staff that are going out on the foot and knocking on doors and bringing people and having them scan our QR code in their preferred language to be able to attend these meetings. So we're really trying to do the best we can in regard to engagement so that we can move forward with the project. This just shows a brief alignment of what I'm talking about when I said a lot is happening all at one time. So we've got the Burnham Yard transportation project that's ending. We have our engagement project that's running. Denver will start their Burnham Yard small area plan. Then CDOT will start their NEPA process. And you'll see at the bottom of this slide, all of that requires stakeholder engagement. We have to talk to people in regard to what they feel is necessary as we start to move forward with the master plan effort and finalize those things as we start to move into that NEPA process. So how can you get project information? we created a website, and we have a lot of different ways for you to engage. We have newsletters that will be going out. We're looking at a lot of information. We've posted a lot of this that has the history of the site. Like I said, I can't make the assumption that everybody knows where Burnham Yard is. So we have history of the site. We have ownership. We have a chart that kind of shows the timeline that we're working with that I've showed you all on the slide. And then we have FAQs that have been created by people asking us questions. So our team is taking copious notes as we go through these meetings and making sure that we're addressing the questions that community members have, that leadership has, and briefing folks. And we're adding those questions to our FAQs, because if you have the question, I guarantee you somebody else has it as well. And so we're adding that to our website so that people can go there and use that site as a resource and get materials, understand when our meetings are, be invited to those meetings, and also get updated information. Please spread the word about what we're doing. So I encourage you, and there's a QR code at the end of my presentation that I'll ask you to scan. This is our website. So like I said, we have a website that shows all of our updates, and we ask people to show up. We want to hear your voice. We want to understand what you need and what is necessary within this community as we start to work on this massive project and a historic project for the state of Colorado and the city and county of Denver. So get involved, scan this code, and I'll go ahead and take questions, I think, Joel.
Thank you. Now, does that code go to the same website was on the previous page?
Yes, I think
Okay.
so. I'm pretty sure it does. Yes.
Okay, and Nathan has put the link in as well, dpa.colorado.gov/Burnham.
Correct.
Great. All right, so we had a few good questions to start us off in the chat. Let's start with David Mincer about I-25.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Burnham Yards was originally purchased by CDOT to make space to expand I-25, and now they've kind of taken that off the table for now. And my question is I guess a lot of us are concerned that 10, 20 years from now, CDOT will come back and be like, just kidding, we're going to actually expand I-25 through Denver. And is making room for right away of an I-25 expansion a part of this analysis? Will that be one of the criteria for the different alignments?
So that's a good question. So as we look at this, we still need to figure out, what plans would be. As of right now, and as we've heard, that it's not in their 10-year plan. So it's not part of anything that we have looked at in regard to expansion. But because we're in the early phases of this project, that's why, we want to make sure that CDOT's at the table with us to discuss, is that a part of their project? As of right now, no, it is not part of the project plan.
Thank you.
Great. Amy has a funding question.
Hi, I assume that you'll go after the pot of money for Dr. Cog tip money. So what cycle, if so, what cycle would that be, just so that it's on our radar? Thanks.
So that's a great question. So we actually supported the city and county of Denver when they did their Chrissy grant. So we are still working on our grant strategy with the city as well as with the railroads. But right now we're waiting to find out from FRA if that Chrissy grant was awarded. And that was close to $38 million, I believe, that they asked for, which includes 6th Avenue, 8th. And then after that, we'll start making some grant decisions on what phase we're going to start moving on next. But we're still very early in that process, but we'll definitely keep you updated in regard to what next phases are for requests for funds.
Okay, thanks. The reason I was asking was because in the Dr. Cog tip application that the city of Denver filled out for the I-25 and Broadway area, the formula for how to calculate vehicle miles traveled reduced, I found troubling the way that is calculated. So I just want to have my eyes on that. So that's why I was asking. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, if you can just make sure that I get your contact information or fill out, use the QR code, and we'll make sure that you get connected, and we'll keep you updated on our strategy. Thank you.
In the meetings that I've been in on that, Amy, a name that you'll recognize, David Kretzinger, who's the transit director for the city of Denver, is there, along with a lot of other folks. And a lot of them, including David, are so on the ball about different funding sources at different phases. It's impressive. Lucia has a question about historic resources.
Hi, yeah, so I know there was talk of the buildings in there, and I go over the 8th Avenue Viaduct fairly regularly, other than the Roundhouse, which could be sort of a cool community area. Does anybody really give a hoot about the buildings in there? I mean, nobody ever sees them. I mean, just because it's old doesn't make it valuable. So I would just like to, just photograph and destroy, as my father-in-law used to say.
Thanks for the thought. We do have to follow a specific process, though, if we're going to destroy. Some of them have actually been destroyed through a fire. So we have to go through an entire process with the SHPO to remove those components like the brick and figure out if we're going to put it in History Colorado or if we're going to move it to a different portion and just designate it as historic to move on. But that is, building 4 is what you're talking about. It's a really cool building, and could we repurpose it? Absolutely. But that's something we have to follow the bureaucratic process in regard to how we either dispose of those buildings and move forward or keep them. So that's all part of the discussion in regard to if we're going to keep this one and take this one down, we do have to follow the federal process for that. But yes, thank you for the comment.
Ben Trepp has a question that shows he's thinking 3-dimensionally. Ben?
So I noticed a lot of your alternatives involved how you move the light out of the way, and one of them involved a trench. I feel if you're going to do a trench and you don't going to put all that effort, you might as well go all in and just do a cut and cover tunnel, kind of like what you see around New York City a lot.
So we have looked at different options. That alternative 2 that you saw with the trenched option, we're still stakeholdering that with RTD because there's been concerns about, like, do we trench it? Is it safe? There's a safety component that comes with it. And so we still have a lot of work to do as we kind of wrap up the study towards November on what that could be. So I'll take that and kind of take it back to the team and have that discussion if they have considered that. But it is something that we haven't looked at right now, but it is something that we can continue to look at as the next couple of months pass. So I'll definitely take that comment into consideration and take it back to our team.
I think that has a lot of promise. That's good. All right. I didn't see any other questions proposed there. I would like to just add one thing that wasn't just because you flew through the presentation. I had no idea you can get through all that information that fast.
I told you.
One of the things that all of these proposals about moving the rail have in common, a couple things, is there's a lot of places where the existing rail, whether it's freight rail or whether it's the light rail, passes at grade, and so you have to have traffic stopped and so forth. And it's very dangerous. Some of these places are east-west crossings for people as well as people in cars. So all of these alternatives are trying to solve absolutely as many of those as possible. And the big versions of these diagrams show how each of the proposals will remove at-grade crossings, which will make the whole area better. And the second thing is that all the alternatives involve accommodating for the future hoped for front range passenger rail, which is a whole nother effort, but relates, at least passes through this area. And so making sure it's as good as possible. So a couple more connections to make. Any other questions? Lucia says, please bring up that cut and cover tunnel at the stakeholder meetings. Thank you, Lucia. Anything else? All right. Well, I think we've reached the end of our meeting. Thank you so much, Natriece, for spending your evening with us. I saw you joined early, so you got to see some other presentations as well. We meet every other month, so the odd-numbered months, second Thursday of the month. If you got the latest email announcing this meeting, down at the bottom, all the dates on that pattern for 2024 have been locked in. So please calendar ahead and send suggestions for topics you think will be interesting. We try to run a dense meeting of timely, interesting topics, bringing the real folks doing the work, as you've seen tonight, so you can get to know them and follow up with them and pursue these topics in your own advocacy and neighborhoods. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a good night.